Hi, Misha here. Well, I had a long night of rearranging furniture after we did some light to medium remodeling of the kitchen, living room, whatnot. Now there's a couch out here for whatever good it is. And I thought before I turned in I'd record a couple of videos. Kind of helps me unwind. And I have covered this helicopter before. The Westland Lynx. But I felt, why not do it again, as I do have a new model. All three are going to be from Corgi. All three are 1/72 scale diecast. Here is the earliest version I have. This is the Army Air Corps' AH.1 from the first Gulf War. Then we have the Navy's HAS.3, and this is the ice version used on HMS Endurance for Arctic patrols. This is from the early 21st century. And then my new model is a Lynx AH.7, which is an upgrade, a modernization of the 1. And this is from more recent conflicts like Afghanistan and the Second Iraq War, circa around 2007. It's not the latest and last version of the Lynx, but it's pretty much the update from original. So yeah, figured we'd go over these again in a little more detail, just for funsies. If you don't like British choppers, I understand, but I do, so won't you join me? Alright, so where did this all begin? I put out a video on the Westland Scout. It was an American model, but went into the history, and really the Scout was one of the first helicopters to go into Army Air Corps service and formed the backbone in their helicopter corps for a number of years. But Westland knew they could do better. Starting in the mid-60s, they started work on what was known at the time as the WG-13. It was to replace the Scout in the Army and the Wasp within the Royal Navy. And also, Britain had been using the UH-1 Huey, or Augusta variants of it, and it was meant to be a more advanced and capable alternative to the Huey. So it was designed to be a general utility, kind of medium lift helicopter, twin turbine engines, which were quickly becoming the norm. And actually, in February of '67, there was a joint Anglo-French agreement on helicopters signed, where basically Westland and Sud Aviation, later Aerospatiale, would join forces. For England's part, they agreed to work with, manufacture some parts, and purchase Sud's Puma and Gazelle. And for France's part, they agreed to purchase the WG-13, later to be the Lynx. They wanted a naval version. They also wanted an armed heavy reconnaissance version. And this is really where the first notion of kind of arming one up, sort of like a Huey Heavy Hog would be, came in. And also about a third 30% or so of parts manufacturing and the workload would be given to SUD, for profit and to have a stake in it. So work would commence throughout 1968, but by 1969, the French military, specifically the French government, would change its mind and pull out. They no longer wanted the Lynx. Now, interestingly, Britain actually went with the Puma and Gazelle. So, for a time, working on an armed version kind of stalled because the British are more concerned about utility transport. By March of 1971, the prototype was ready, and it first took to the air. And then they would make another dozen, so a total of 13 pre-production models. And actually in 1972, one of these would set a world speed record of just shy of 200 miles per hour. And by world speed record, I mean for, rotary aircraft. It was like 199.9 miles per hour. Now, it would actually lose this speed record later to the Russian Mi-24 Hind, but then it would regain it in 1986 when a newer version of the Lynx achieved 216.5 miles per hour, a record that I believe, at least in some situations, still stands to this day. So yeah, it had a very promising early start, and Westland took their time developing it. And it wasn't until 1977 that the very first ones were delivered to the Army Air Corps. And they would work with these, train on these, and then they would first start to deploy them, to giving them additional operational readiness by 1979. So what is this aircraft? Well, it's a very neat, versatile chopper. Like I said, it has twin engines. Like the German BO-105, it has hingeless rotor blades, so it's all one unit, which has several advantages, especially for acrobatics and speed, and also just simplicity of maintenance. Westland designed it to be very easily configurable, which was good. That meant the military or even civilian users could configure it however they might want. And they promised, or at least claimed, that you could basically reconfigure it for most things in under an hour. Very versatile. It held 2 up front. It could carry as many as 10 in the back, depending on the configuration. Typically in the UK, the setup would be pilot, observer, or co-pilot, and door gunner / crew chief. So crew of 3 was standard, but you could fly it with 1 if needed. And instead of having personnel in the back, of course, you could have cargo. Alternatively, you could fill the back cabin with fuel tanks for longer range. Or you could install a communications suite, radio gear and other, to have this operate as an aerial command, communications, coordination post. Of course, you could also fit it with medical gear. You could outfit these for search and rescue. All kinds of possibilities, really. And again, this was the original AH.1. Britain would arm around 60 of these with 8 wire-guided anti-tank missiles, TOW missiles. you remember, the Scout could also use the SS-11 guided anti-tank missile. The airframe was actually quite aerodynamic. This was a very acrobatic helicopter. It could do barrel rolls, loops, other tricks. So much so that it was actually used by the British Black Cats acrobatic helicopter aviation team. Pretty neat. Well, the Army Air Corps placed an initial order for 100, which Westland was delivering in the late 70s and early 80s. But, not to be left out, the Royal Navy would soon get in on the Lynx action. So, with the AH.1 taking care of the needs of the Army Air Corps, Westland would turn to the HAS. Initially, it was the 2, which first was in Royal Navy service in 1981. Now, it's worth pointing out that it was very quickly replaced by the HAS.3. The 3 had an uprated engines, an improved gearbox, and a new, more effective, more reliable flotation system. So important, but relatively minor. They would initially make 60 HAS-2s. 52 of them would be upgraded to HAS-3 standard, plus an additional 30 new manufacturer HAS-3s. And the program, the fleet, would be updated throughout the 80s. The Navy Lynx, as it's also known, was developed closely cooperating and working with the Royal Navy to get what they needed. And one crucial thing, remember this is late 70s, early 80s, the Royal Navy was retiring its larger ships, and so this was designed from the outset to operate from essentially the smallest flight deck conceivable. To that end, it has folding rotor blades, and also the tail can be folded to some extent. It also has a wheeled undercarriage rather than your typical skids. This would allow the Navy version to maneuver around a deck on its own power to get where it needed to go and not hamper the operations of the ship. It had several roles: coastal patrol, vertical resupply, transportation of personnel. Like the Army version, it could carry a maximum crew of 10. It was also charged with being anti-submarine and anti-shipping. In the anti-sub role, it would be armed with 2 torpedoes, homing torpedoes, or 2 depth charges. And in the anti-shipping, it would be armed with 4 Seaskewer semi-active anti-ship missiles, which actually could all be fired almost at once, known as a ripple fire, for going after the biggest targets. It also had a sea spray radar, the standard equipment, And of course all the regular corrosion resistance and whatnot you would expect in a naval chopper. But yeah, it was really designed with the Navy in mind. Now it's a little sticky. Come on. The door's open on these Corgis, which is kind of neat. Let you look inside there. It was also designed to service ships that could not have a helicopter actually land on them. There were provisions for a hoist. It could also use rope systems to either lower or raise things. Just really well thought out helicopter for naval use. This was in service during the Falklands War, 1982. It was charged with 24/7 patrol to protect the British fleet against submarines or attack ships. It also was charged with delivering troops and moving supplies around the fleet. And actually in May of that year, the first Seaskewer missile would be launched in combat, and an Argentinian patrol boat or gunboat would be hit and actually quite significantly damaged. No Lynx helicopters were shot down during that war, but 3 were lost when they were on board vessels that were sunk. These were also operated alongside other helicopters such as the Sea King and Gazelle for supporting Army and Marine and other operations. So it came out of that war pretty good shape. And its next major use would be in the Persian Gulf. In 1990, the HAS.3, actually they would do a specialized version called the HAS.3 GM for Gulf modification. They would just essentially update the electronic countermeasures, the friend and foe systems, and give it forward-looking infrared radar. A few other little updates. But they would station these in the Gulf for Operation Desert Shield. And then they would be used actively in Operation Desert Storm, and actually would take part in the largest naval battle of that war. Yes, Iraq had a navy. And yes, they used it. And yes, these clobbered them. 25 Seaskewer missiles were launched in anger during that conflict in February primarily of 91. Of those, 18 hit their targets, so not bad. So just under 75% hit ratio. Not bad at all. And they did a significant damage to the Iraqi Navy and shipping, and were quite instrumental. Also used for communications patrol, and were on hand for rescue if needed. And they would operate alongside their Army brothers. 24 tow missile-equipped AH.1s would be deployed for the same conflict. And actually the first recorded use in combat of a tow missile from a British helicopter would be in February. That day they would knock out 4 tanks plus 2 APCs, and these would be sent out on hunter-killer or seek-and-destroy missions for Iraqi armor. They would also be used for close air support for troops, and also to lift special forces into Kuwait and also onto oil platforms in the Persian Gulf, again along with the HS.3. And again, we're quite successful. But it wasn't all success. After the Gulf War in 1994, March, and what many call their biggest operational victory against any helicopter in Northern Ireland, the IRA, using essentially a homemade mortar, shot down a Lynx when it was attempting to land. The helicopter was wrecked, but the pilot was able to make a crash landing, and thanks to the durability and dependability of the craft, all of the crew survived. So, kind of a, better than a Black Hawk Down scenario, at least. This helicopter is relatively small, about 50 feet long. Again, it can carry up to 10, 8 in the back, 2 in the front, at least in the passenger configuration. The combat version's maximum speed is 201 miles per hour. As we've seen, it can be fitted with a wide range of weapons. In addition to the missiles you've seen here and the torpedoes mentioned, it could also carry rocket pods, 2 cannon, and of course can have door guns. Most of the earlier versions had 30 caliber door guns. Some of the later versions would actually have 50 cals though. Just a very capable helicopter. However, by the 1990s, it wasn't exactly a spring chicken anymore. It wasn't old by any stretch of the imaginations, but it could use a fresh lick of paint and maybe a tune-up, a service check, which would lead to the newer versions for the 21st century. Hi, future Misha breaking in here for a minute on past Misha's video. I recorded that a little over a month ago. I got sick with the flu, as most did, after Christmas, and so I didn't get it published yet. And in the interim, this helicopter came in. Actually, it came in about the day I was the most sick, so I didn't get a chance to open it for a bit. Now, excuse the kind of awkward editing, but I do what I can. This is a model of the upgraded HMA.8, which stands for Helicopter Maritime Attack. This is the upgraded version of the HAS.3. This is analogous to, this is basically the Navy's version of the AH.7 or AH.9. It's based on the company's Super Lynx, which itself was based on the Combat Lynx. All that dates back to 1989 and 1991. After the Gulf War, the Navy started upgrading some of their HS.3s to the HMA.8. It's a similar helicopter, but it uses newer rotor blades, main rotors. It has uprated Gemtech engines. It has a new improved rotor on the tail that's actually a little bit larger, a little bit taller back there. But the biggest differences are in the nose. The Mark 8 had a new 360-degree radar dish under the nose there. Hopefully I'm getting it. That was standard, and it had as an option a new infrared optical sensor on the nose, which you see on newer aircraft like the Apache and even like the new Cobras, the AH.1Z. Otherwise, it's pretty standard, just an improved version. And of course, the cockpit has been updated as necessary too. The fleet would see several of their older Lynxes updated throughout the 1990s, and by the 21st century, this was the standard. And it would serve until it would kind of morph into the Wildcat, and then officially be retired in March of 2017 from the Royal Navy. This model is again from Corgi, like the rest. This is from the Black Cat's Naval aerobatic team. As I said at the beginning of the video, the Lynx was quite a aerobatic aircraft, helicopter especially. Could do loops and rolls and all kinds of fun stuff. So it was a great candidate for an aerobatic. And these models are pretty much sold out everywhere. I found one in stock online, new at a shop right before Christmas, and when I had ordered it, why not? Figured the problem with the Corgis, they're almost all limited production, so if you wait and they're gone, they are usually gone for good. Sometimes they might do a new version in the future, but you never know. And since I have the Army's AH.7, I thought it's only honest to do the Navy's counterpart. It's a cool model, and you know me and cats, so it seemed like a good fit. Again, apologies for kind of the awkward cut in, but I didn't think this was worth doing a whole new video over, so future Misha, well, now I'll hand you back to Misha from the past, and get on from there. Let's get to it. As I said, this is the AH.7, and it's just one of many variants that appeared over the years of the Lynx, produced by Westland and later Augusta Westland, or Westland Augusta, as they merged. In fact, by the 21st century, it was estimated that at least 40 variations existed amongst many nations. The Netherlands, Germany, Brazil, eventually France would as well use some of the Lynx in some capacity. But we're talking about Britain, and I'm, late night, so. The AH.7 was kind of a long time coming. Initially, it was going to be the AH.5, but that never really got past the prototype pre-production stage. There was an interim AH.1 that had an uprated engine, but the 7 came out and it had the improved gearbox and an uprated engine, many other tweaks, and then eventually, not at the beginning, but eventually it would have a new rotor system known as the BERP, the British Experimental Rotor Program, to give an acronym. And these will start to come into Army use. They would build around a dozen new production AH.7s, and they would convert over 100 existing older AH.1s to the new standard, giving them new engines. And really by the 90s and 2000s, this was effectively the new Lynx. In 1989, Westland would test fly what they called the Combat Lynx, which was essentially an AH AH.7 here, but with the wheeled undercarriage of the Navy version. And this would evolve basically into the Super Lynx, so on and so forth. The Army Air Corps would end up with some, known to them as the AH.9. They would have 16 new production and 8 conversions from either AH.1s or AH.7s. But basically, yeah, it was a wheeled version, and it did have an upgraded gearbox again, improved gearbox. I think they tweaked the transmission a bit. But, you know, they never had that many. They were kind of for special purposes. These were used in Kosovo in 1999. In fact, they were there in June when a bunch of Chinooks came in, and they escorted them. They also provided close air support and combat resupply. And they were at the forefront in 2003 in March when the Second Iraq War began, when the invasion of Iraq. In fact, they were the most common helicopter in the British military. They were given the job of escort, communications, close air support, response, and of course search and rescue. Unfortunately, the AH.7, specifically its engines, weren't always up to the task of operating in such a hot, dusty environment, which ultimately would lead to the AH.9A, which had a new, more powerful engine set. But only 22 AH.9As would be converted from older existing models. So again, a limited use thing. In the beginning, these were not in Afghanistan, but in 2006, the first Lynxes were sent there. But originally, they were only used in the winter months because, again, the summer months, the heat combined with the higher altitude, they just did not perform very well, which would lead the AH.9A to be deployed in Afghanistan as well, where it was much beloved, at least compared to the original. Again, it just wasn't what this was designed for. So it was doing its best. But also, by 2006, we're a 30-year-old helicopter. To that end, as involvement in Afghanistan and whatnot drew down, the Lynx service did as well. In March of 2017, the Royal Navy would retire their fleet from active use. And then in 2018, the Army Air Corps would retire theirs. And initially, this was replaced by a variant of the Lynx known as the Lynx Wildcat, but enough changes happened to the new design that it was just that, a new design, with very little in common with its parent design. So you can say the Lynx is still in service if you like, in the form of the Wildcat, but really the Wildcat's its own thing. About 450 would be produced for both the British military and export customers. And just because Britain has retired the Lynx doesn't mean everyone else has. It is still a very good, very capable helicopter. Britain has just been retiring a lot of stuff in the last decade. The Harrier, the Tornado, the Jaguar. Yeah. But yeah, I just thought I would revisit since I had this new model from Corgi. Their helicopters are always quite nice. You have fully rotating blades. You have opening doors, pilot figures. You often get crew or other equipment in the back when you open the doors. When they need it, they have the armament. And they usually come with nice stands. This one in particular is nice because it's got a metal arm. The other two are plastic, but that's okay. Still a good little stand. And you can do a little bit of positioning with them. Just nice, quite weighty die-cast models. But yeah, I just felt like revisiting the Lynx tonight. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, do please post them below. And if you could, as always, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.